What is up, you beautiful podcasters? If you've ever wondered what to post on social media to turn your followers into podcast listeners, this episode's going to blow your mind. I'm joined by Andrea Jones. She's the host of the Savvy Social podcast. She's a teacher at the Savvy Social School, and she's an absolute social media genius. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn the mistakes you might be making when posting on social media to promote your podcast, how to get people to stay longer on your posts and defeat the dreaded social media algorithm. She's going to share a bunch of new trends and tools that she's seeing in social media for podcasters and a whole bunch more along the way. Now, she's also one of the experts that's included in the Poddex mobile app. We've got a ton of mini courses that you can take to grow your podcast. And Andrea shares the 5 pillars of what to post on social media as a podcaster. So go ahead, download the Poddex mobile app. It's available on Apple and Android, and we have tons of mini courses that you can consume quickly and apply that to your podcast to start to grow your show. Now, I'm super excited. I learned so much in this episode, and I can't wait for you to get all the knowledge that she dropped in this episode of Podcast Therapy. So what mistakes are podcasters making when they're posting on social media? You know, you release an episode and you run out to social media to let the world. What do you think, as a social media expert, are some of the mistakes people make when they're posting?
You know, I think it's funny because as podcasters, we get so caught up in our own work. Like, we're like, this is awesome. Everyone should listen to it. And they should. But what we do on social media sometimes is we say that. We go, this episode is awesome. You should listen to it, without the context of thinking about how people are going to see that post. Right. And most often, our social media followers are not listeners yet. Sometimes they just followed us. So they may not even know that this is a podcast yet. So I think the biggest mistake people make is not taking the time to explain it again, assuming that, you know, everyone has hundreds of thousands of posts in their feed every single day. So when they land on yours, they don't remember who you are. They don't remember who your podcast is or what it's about. And so you kind of have to explain it. So the biggest mistake people make is just like, here's this new podcast, instead of, you know, kind of talking through it. Like, this is what you'll experience. This is what you'll feel. This is how you listen to it. By the way, this is a podcast. It's free. This is how you access it. And so I think sometimes we forget those specifics because we just get so excited about our thing that we want to share with everybody.
Right. I see a lot of check out this episode of the podcast. And one thing I just tell people to try to focus on is what's in it for them, right? So instead of saying, check out my latest podcast, say something like, in this podcast, I'm going to teach you how to make $1 billion on TikTok, right? So then you qualify the person that's like, oh, that's something that interests me, but check out my blank, I think is probably the worst thing you could post, because then you're becoming sort of static noise.
Yeah. And if you think about the feeling too, that you want someone to have when they're listening to your show, that's the good thing to put in your post. So it works whether you have like an educational podcast, an interview podcast, an audio drama. So for example, if you have an audio drama, you could talk about how in this episode, we tour a house that's haunted, and you'll be able to hear the ghosts, right? So that could be great in this kind of episode. But instead of saying what it is, you could talk about the feeling someone has when they listen to it. So you got to listen to this episode, because about halfway through, we promise you the hair on your arms is going to raise. You're going to get goosebumps. You're going to want to listen to this episode with the lights on. Like, those are all feelings that people have when they listen and experience to your show. So if you can put that in the social media post, you're going to actually have a better chance of people going, oh, I should listen to that episode, instead of what usually happens, which is, oh yeah, I remember that. I'll go check it out later. And then later never happens.
That's right. I love the feeling. That's something that I really hadn't thought about, is, you know, inciting some type of maybe even emotional response, or, you know, the hair on the back of your neck. Really, I mean, I almost feel like my hair I don't have any hair anywhere, but you know, I felt it stand up, you know, when you said that, because you've had that experience before. So using a feeling that somebody is
has already had or is used to will be more of a vessel to get them to take action. So speaking of taking action, I think that what we're all trying to do when we post on social media, besides look cool and show everyone we're, really great and everything, is actually to get somebody to transition to opening up an app and listening to the podcast. Are there any tips or tricks you have for encouraging people to actually take an action and become a listener?
Yeah. So I think there's two different ways people take action on social media posts. And there's actually two different types of posts that we can use, like two different types of posts that we can post. So an example would be if we're talking about our podcast, typically we want people to go listen, but sometimes we look at that post and we go, man, nobody liked and commented on it, so it must not be successful. So I want you to take a second, if you're listening to this, watching this, to actually go into your analytics and see how many people clicked or looked at your profile based on that specific post for the podcast. And then use that as your baseline, and you can start measuring from there based on the strategies that you learned today, right? So you want to give yourself a baseline, because sometimes we don't know how many people are taking action, and we've got to know.
Yeah.
And I mentioned
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I mentioned that there are two different kinds of posts. So the second post is that post that is for engagement, like when you're asking someone a question. And so sometimes we look at those posts and we go, man, nobody's listening to the podcast. It's probably because you asked a question, they're commenting instead.
Right. So a singular action, right? So a singular thing to do, because people get paralyzed and they're not going to go do 5 things. If you ask them a question, they're going to answer the question and engage. And if you don't have a baseline of, hey, how many people are liking this post, you have no way to really measure improvement. So for some of us social dummies, how do you see those type of insights, say on an Instagram or a Facebook?
Yeah. So on both Instagram and Facebook, when you're looking at your post on your profile, there's a little option that says view insights. So you want to tap on that. And if you swipe up as you're looking at that, you'll actually see more insights. So they show you kind of like some on the screen, but you actually have to swipe to see the rest of them. And from there, you'll be able to see how many people clicked over to your profile and how many people looked at your website. So these are called profile views. And I think they call them website taps now, because you tapped that link in the bio, right? And so those are really oftentimes good indicators of interest. So it is really hard to track whether someone actually listened to the episode from social media, but you can track how many people took action based on those insights. So definitely take a look, and you may surprise yourself with how much action people are taking on your posts.
Yeah, and I think
but if you start, go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, sure. I was just saying that I think that's a good way to get out of the sometimes depressing hole of thinking like no one's interacting with me or no one's looking at me, to be able to go, if you don't know that exists, you can't even see that there is activity on those posts without somebody commenting or liking it.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's a feeling too, because we're emotional creatures, as we kind of talked about already with how we make decisions on social media. We feel like people aren't looking at our posts or not taking action. We actually need the data to back that up.
I love that. That's great. And as a non-analytical person, sometimes it's something I overlook, is kind of taking a peek at that to have some type of baseline, which you had mentioned earlier. So things are changing. The world is changing. The way we live is changing. What kind of trends are you seeing in social media? I know that, we're sort of going from this, I feel like audiograms are becoming a thing of the past. They were something 3 years ago that you almost had to do to try to promote your podcast. But I feel like now audiograms may be behind the times. How do you feel about that? And what trends are you seeing in social media for podcasting?
Yeah. There are two things that are trending. The first thing is just whatever is capturing people's attention. So that changes a lot. Like you mentioned audiograms. It used to be audiograms. It used to be like people would linger on those posts because they were like, oh, cool. But now that we've seen it a lot, we're kind of like, we'll keep swiping. So as a podcaster, we have to ask ourselves, what will cause someone to linger on this post versus the ones around it? And it's micro videos. So actual videos of either people or things that are happening is what's capturing attention. More specifically on a platform like Instagram, it's Reels.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Instagram Reels are getting the most attention out of any type of video content on Instagram right now. Now that may change in the upcoming year, but that's kind of where people's attention is going, and it's the nature of social media. It's kind of like how social media started. Like, I don't know if you remember back in the day, we used to like go on social media and just like, what am I going to see today? Like swipe, and like this whole discovery function of like people we would have never met before. And it kind of drifted away from that into like you had to search for someone and then follow them and then you'd see their content. You're not really getting a lot of like suggested content until we had this shift into Reels. And now it's like you can go to the Reels page, just like TikTok, and you can keep swiping for hours, and Instagram's going to keep delivering you content that's enjoyable to consume. And so because of that, I think as podcasters, we actually have more ability to get discovered if we start playing around in some newer features like Reels.
Yeah. And so if I understand this correctly, I'm pretty sure, and I'm not a TikToker, but TikTok just starts playing videos as soon as you get onto the platform. And so with the Reels availability, you're just constantly being served new things instead of having to sift through. So for somebody who isn't using Reels, like myself, I see a lot of people dancing. I see a lot of people pointing to things. Where does somebody start with Reels, or what's a good resource to kind of figure out how to use it in the best way?
Yeah, someone who I've been studying, because I've been studying this, because I actually don't have a good answer yet. It's so new. At the time of recording this, I think it's been out for 2 months.
Okay.
But one of the people who I like to watch doing Reels is Pat Flynn.
Oh, yeah.
Because he doesn't really dance. Sometimes he does, but like his content is just more interesting content. And it's like, how can you capture someone's interest in, 15 seconds or less kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I think that is the way forward. But for a lot of us too, it's a really high production quality. So some of the things that are working well right now, if you're like, I don't want to dance, I don't want to point, is to post memes to Reels, especially if they are like a GIF. So I posted one of like Will Ferrell, like on the little massage chair, like trying to drink the wine. And I was like, this is how I feel about like all of the changes on social media right now. Like, I'm just trying to keep up. And it got quite a bit of engagement because it was so relatable. And I wasn't in the video, I wasn't dancing or pointing, but I think if you can take like a GIF and add text to it that's relatable to your audience, that could be a really good, easy way to start doing Reels.
Cool. Yeah. And I think some of the Reels that I've seen, as opposed to stories are sort of like a point of view. I'm talking to you, where Reels are sort of the opportunity for you to create something that's like, has more of a story to it. It's almost backwards. It's like stories should be called Reels and Reels should be called stories, because you need to have some type of element. And you reference Pat Flynn, and he'll do things like stand in his hallway and show one door, and there's something behind that door, and then he walks to the other door, and it's more of it has more story value to it than like, hey, check out my podcast. When you're going onto your stories, you just start shouting at people and maybe tag someone. But I think I'm going to experiment with Reels a little more. I've just been afraid of it because I'm just like, I tell people, if you see me pointing and dancing, I think someone's taken me hostage or something, because it's just not who I am, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that, but that's really the majority of what I've seen people using it for. So I'm just like, I don't really know what to do with this, but I think you've inspired me to maybe create some type of storytelling type content. You also mentioned micro videos. So I have been using a tool called Clipscribe. Do you have any special tools that you like for making micro videos for social media?
Yes. So my current favorite is Kapwing. And they're doing actually a really good job with YouTube content and kind of educating around this micro video style content. But it's easy because they've got, the classic, like there's a graphic on the image, or you've got space to add like the text at the top and captions at the bottom. So they've got these templates where you can just like pop your video in and like chop it up. And so I think that when we're looking at the micro video content, like using those tools can really help to like fast track that process. Because I don't know about you, but when I open up like Adobe Final Cut Pro or something like that, I'm like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. It's for what you're doing, it's overcomplicated. And so tools, so you said Kapwing?
Yes.
Okay.
Kapwing.
I wonder how they had that, the meeting. Sometimes I wonder about these meetings, like, okay, we've got this great tool. What do you think we should call it? How about Kapwing? All right, let's do it. It's just, you got to make up like a new word all of a sudden for every company, but they put together a workflow for you that something like an Adobe does already, but it's really complicated to do that. And so tools like Clipscribe and Kapwing, you literally drag your video in and it's going to transcribe it and it's going to put things in the right place. And then you just have to tweak it to your brand settings or, add your logo and things like that. And I do think that there's something very valuable with you being shown podcasting as opposed to the audio waveform moving that is more captivating to people because they're actually going to see you. And as human beings, we look for faces. We look for, you look at the moon, you see a face on the moon because we're biologically programmed to want to see a face, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think too, it's kind of like the nature of social media. So if you think about the algorithm, right? We're talking about what works right now. All that the algorithm wants is your attention. So when you're scrolling through, say, Instagram, you're going to look at an image and then you're going to see a video and another image. That video, even if you're not watching the whole thing, you're going to watch more of that video than you would stare at an image. And so naturally, the algorithm is going to go, wait a second, this has to be important because we noticed that Travis glanced at this image, and then watched this video for 5 seconds longer than he glanced at those images. And so it's just kind of like the nature of the algorithm too, as a podcaster, when we're thinking about how do we capture attention. If you have someone talking on the screen, they're going to linger longer than a graphic or even just a little wavy line.
Yeah, that's great. I really didn't think about engagement as far as how long you are spending with a post as opposed to just seeing the post. Now, lots of people talk about the algorithm. If you imagined, what does the algorithm look like? Is it a little goblin? What does the algorithm look like to you?
To me, the algorithm looks like that crazy girlfriend meme where it's like
where she's just staring.
Yeah, she's staring. It's like it's trying so hard to do everything that you want it to, and it's just coming off creepy, right?
Yeah.
I think it's like the algorithm's desperate to like give us what we want. And if it would just sometimes if it would just pay a little more attention, I think it could actually give us what we want, but it's trying so hard.
Yeah.
And it's like almost creepy level hard where you just think of something one time and now it's like showing you a million, like Siamese cats because you thought of it for a second. And so I think sometimes it's like, no, we need like a balance between everything. So yeah, that crazy girlfriend meme where it's like,
That's a good answer. And I presume you've seen The Social Dilemma with the guys in the room with the computers and they're like, oh, he's back on Facebook. Let's show him a post from his ex-girlfriend. It's like these guys that are directing someone's life. Yeah. So very interesting. So when you're getting into social media, and not all of us are like fully, using all the platforms, I think the first thing that becomes a bottleneck for anybody to be a creator is just like feeling like you have to be everywhere. You get that terrible feeling of overwhelm. Like, I need to make a YouTube video. Now I need to make a micro video. Now I need to do Instagram and TikTok. And what's the new one? The private one, Clubhouse. And there's just, it's a never ending race to be everywhere. What are some tips you could share for somebody to reduce overwhelm of the FOMO of needing to be everywhere?
Yeah. So FOMO is going to happen regardless. And I think that the one group of people who has the right to feel FOMO, I guess, are marketers, because we have to figure it out. The rest of us, you wait till the marketers figure it out. Because it can be a lot, especially as a content creator, because we really should be putting our creative energy into our content and not into figuring out TikTok or figuring out Clubhouse or whatever the case may be. So my suggestion is to focus on one platform. And I know it feels restrictive, but honestly, a lot of my clients and students are able to get to their goals faster because of that laser focus. Okay. And I want you to think of it kind of like, the analogy I like to use is going to the gym, which, we're in COVID time, so I'm not quite sure how this analogy still works.
Yeah.
But if you go to the gym, it's better to have like a plan where you're like, I'm going to do these 3 machines, and I'm going to do these 3 machines on this day, and then these 3 on the next day, and I'm going to rotate, and then I'm going to have a break. Like, that's a plan. And if you work the plan, you could, build up your muscles. If you just go into the gym and you do every single machine in the same amount of time, so you're only going to spend like a minute per machine or 30 seconds per machine, you're not going to see the progress because you're just not going to have spent enough time there. So it's the same with social media, right? Like, when we're thinking about a platform, stick to a platform, work that platform. The only platform that I would say is the hardest right now, if you're starting from scratch, so starting from zero, you're just starting your podcast, is Facebook. It's one of the hardest platforms to grow organically without having any paid advertising. And even as a podcaster, paid advertising is a slippery slope in the beginning because we're not quite sure what resonates with our audience, or even sometimes who our listeners are yet.
Yeah.
2 of the easiest right now are Twitter and Instagram for podcasters. So if you're a podcaster, I almost always recommend starting with either Twitter or Instagram, because you can find people and have conversations and make connections. And when you post something, people are actually maybe able to see it.
It's good advice. Yeah. And people will ask you, hey, aren't you on this platform? Aren't you on this platform? And you can just say, hey, right now I'm focused on Instagram. And that's something I tell people is, you want to find me? I spend most of my time on Instagram because it's what I enjoy using the most. It's not because I think I have to. It's just the one that resonates with me. So I highly recommend that, like, hey, maybe you just love TikTok, then just go to TikTok and spend all your time there. And there's a concept, an inch wide and a mile deep, right? So I think what you were describing in the gym is, focusing, laser focus will get you gains, right? Those huge muscles. And then you can slowly start to add more machines into your repertoire, or more platforms into your repertoire as you're marketing yourself. It was a really good answer and a really great analogy. I love that. So we've been talking about change and new things. And are there any new tools that you have been enjoying? We mentioned Kapwing for social media or for content creators.
Yeah. So my go-to tool, especially if you're trying to get into the consistent habit of creating content and scheduling posts, is Fan Booster. It's really great for some of the things I mentioned, like seeing how many profile visits you have and how many website clicks you get. So that's a really good one. Some of the other tools for social media, like I use my tried and true, like Canva. I love Canva for design and for creating great graphics. I love using Raw Pixel for stock photos and finding like stock photos that look like real people and not weird. Like, why is someone doing that stock photo? You know the ones?
I know the ones very well.
Yeah. There's quite a few out there. But yeah, I use my tried and true tools to really help me kind of take things to the next level. And then the last one that I've been playing around with just recently, like within the past few days, is Restream. I want to do more live streaming in the new year. And so I'm using Restream to stream both on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. And so that's a fun one. And they've got like a studio where you can like add branded graphics and all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to play around with it, but that's kind of like the newest one. I don't have a review of it yet because I just started using it, but I'm really liking it so far.
Cool. I use StreamYard for that. And it's a pretty nice interface. I'm sure they're all very similar. And I'm glad you brought this up because this was something that wasn't on my planned questions for you for podcasters. But, with social media, it seems like live streaming is growing in popularity and creates some form of exclusivity or urgency to participate. Are you seeing the same thing on your end with going live? Is that why you're endeavoring into that more as opposed to just static content like YouTube video or a podcast?
Yeah, so I would say the live streams definitely serve a different purpose than the static content. So when I think about something like a podcast or even like a YouTube video, it's more for those people who've just discovered the brand and they're maybe learning something or getting to know the brand. Whereas the live stream serves those people in the middle who they already kind of know me and they want to feel connected and they want that sense of community. And so it serves a different group of people. I think it's rare to have someone who joins a live stream and then hangs out with you for 30 minutes, whatever, they don't know you. Rare, but not impossible. And so I do want to serve kind of that middle group of people who, maybe they're not in my programs or they're not a client or something like that, but let's just hang out for a little while and teach something live. So yeah, I do see that shift, especially now that we're spending so much time indoors and not as much time socializing as we have been this year. And so I'm seeing a lot of people actually like enjoying live streaming again, which went against my predictions. Last year, I predicted that live streaming was not going to be popular, and then a pandemic happened.
Yeah. Well,
so,
how do you predict that, right? If you could have predicted the pandemic, now then there you'd be like Podstradamus, right?
Yes. Yes,
So,
I'll go back in time.
Yes, I know it's very strange, and it's funny because the last time I actually saw you in real life was right before everything exploded. It was at Podfest, and this is the part where people were putting stickers on their badge that said like, I'm not comfortable being touched right now because it was just starting. And then right after that, it was just like, the movie Outbreak started to happen and here we are. And now people use Zoom as a verb, right? It used to be like, I'll Skype you, but now people use Zoom as their official verb of video conferencing. And
Yep.
I think that and we were just talking about this before we started the podcast, that there's a lot of opportunity right now for people to start podcasting, start growing their audience through social media, start doing live streaming. And there's a lot of great tools that we mentioned in the show already. Canva is one of my favorites. We've talked about StreamYard, Kapwing, ClipScribe. So there's all these tools out there that are going to allow you to do this much faster. So I have to tell you guys who you're listening or watching, I took the course that Andrea offers at Savvy Social School. It really helped me start to figure out how to do social media better. I am not a marketer. I'm just a dude. And this gave me some really great insight. So I highly recommend you check out the Savvy Social School. Additionally, you have a free course, which is available at onlinedrea.com/free. And I'll put that, of course, in the show notes below or wherever the show notes go today. And what can they expect from that free course if they participate?
Yeah, it's a really great foundational resource, especially if you feel that overwhelm. Like you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or where to start. And it walks through our social media framework. So building out a strategy that works for you. And I actually use podcasting as an example for what a typical week should look like for a content plan. So
Perfect.
definitely check it out. There's a workbook that goes along with it. And I think it's a really great resource, whether you're beginning or not, to kind of give you that foundational strategy so that you don't have to guess what you're supposed to do next.
That's so great. And I think that, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so giving people this free strategy is really going to help them have a leg up on the next person and stop posting, check out my latest episode, because no one's going to do anything when you do that. Andrea, you're one of my favorite people in marketing, in podcasting, and I really appreciate you coming on to Podcast Therapy to share all these valuable tips with my community.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I always love talking to you, Travis. It's always a good time.
Yeah. So we'll have to do it again soon. And is there anything else you'd like to share with the world before we go?
If you like listening to this podcast, check out my podcast, the
Oh,
Savvy
of course.
Social Podcast.
I forgot to mention the Savvy Social Podcast. My bad. So Savvy Social Podcast is how you can get all kinds of tips and tricks right into your ears. Andrea is a rock star at podcasting, and I think that you would absolutely love the show. So just go ahead and hit that little subscribe button and get in there and take yourself to the next level.